One of the biggest problems facing our country right now is our economy. But over the last 20 years, states have increased their spending on prisons by 570%. It costs an average of $28,000 per person per year that they're in jail. In 2009, there were 2,297,400 people in prisons in the U.S. That equals out to an average of $64,327,200,000 a year that we are spending on prisons. Today I'm going to discuss alternatives to incarceration that can save us money and benefit our communities. According to Families Against Mandatory Minimums, an alternative to incarceration is a kind of punishment other than jail time that can be given to a person who commits a crime. After listening to what I have to say, you will have an idea of where many of our tax dollars are being spent and how the government can save money. You will also learn that you can support alternative incarceration by supporting organizations such as Families Against Mandatory Minimums. I'm going to answer 3 questions. The first question I will answer is, what is alternative incarceration? Next, I will answer what the alternatives to incarceration actually are. Finally, I will give you all of the positives to alternative incarceration. The first question I will answer is, what is alternative incarceration? As I had said earlier, alternative incarceration is any kind of punishment other than jail time that can be given to a specific person who commits a crime. Next, I will give you examples of alternative incarceration. We have all heard of probation, house arrest, fines, community service, but you may not have heard of drug courts, mental health courts, halfway houses, sex offender treatment, and restorative justice, and finally public shaming. The first one I would like to discuss is drug courts. Drug courts are a special branch of courts that already exist in our country. In many states, the drug courts vary, but usually they are the same because they require random drug testing, counseling. The offender is required to go to Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous. They are also required to see probation officers, and they need to report regularly to courts to show their progress. Along with drug courts, we have mental health courts. Mental health courts are specialized courts for offenders suffering from mental illness, mental disabilities, drug addictions, and personality disorders. Housing, healthcare, and life skills training is all promoted through mental health courts. Halfway houses are mostly used after prison, but a better way that we could use these is instead of sending somebody back to prison for violating a parole, they could be sent to a halfway house and be monitored. This keeps them in the community. They would be able to keep a job and be a functional part of society. Sex offender treatment usually consists of inpatient or outpatient treatment. They have to follow a strict probation. They're allowed no contact with their victims and no internet usage, and have strict living standards. They're usually not allowed to live by schools or parks, and they have to be approved to live with roommates or anything like that, etc. According to Families Against Mandatory Minimums, restorative justice is a holistic sentencing process focused on repairing harm and bringing healing to all those who are impacted by a crime, including the offender. Restorative justice brings the offender and the victim together to promote healing for the victim usually, and helps build a relationship and make apologies, etc. Finally, I'd like to discuss public shaming. Public shaming is basically public humiliation. For example, a male thief would have to stand in front of a post office wearing a sign that says, "I am a male thief, and this is my punishment." They would usually have to do that for about 100 hours, and then their debt to society would be considered paid. Finally, I'm going to explain all of the positives of alternative incarceration. According to Mind and Hearts, prison has caused states to increase spending by 570% over the last 20 years. Alternative incarceration would save taxpayers millions of dollars a year. One of the biggest problems facing our prisons right now is overcrowding, and a lot of the time the punishment doesn't really fit the crime, so alternative incarceration gives better sentencing options and puts the offender in a different program other than prison or jail time. One of the other positives to alternative incarceration is it is proven to reduce crime rates, because these alternatives usually confront the underlying cause of crime, such as drug addiction or mental disability. It helps the offenders to not reoffend or commit any more crimes. Finally, one of the biggest positives of alternative incarceration is it keeps the offenders with their families and allows them to hold jobs and pay taxes and contribute to society. I have answered 3 questions. I have started out with answering what is alternative incarceration. Then I gave you some examples of the alternatives to incarceration, and finally I explained why these alternatives are better than jail time and how they could save us money, etc. My question for you is, why is our country spending billions of dollars a year when these alternatives are cheaper and significantly better for communities? Does anyone have any questions? Timothy.
How long would someone go to prison for stealing approximately $500 worth of stuff?
Usually if somebody steals $500 worth of stuff, the punishment would be a 5-year term in jail. And that costs us over $100,000 with the rate of $28,000 per year. Our tax money they use our tax money, and it costs us $100,000. Anyone else? Joey.
How would alternative incarceration affect violent offenders?
Most of the alternatives that I've listed today are only for non-violent offenders. Unfortunately, violent offenders, they would still usually be put into prison and have to serve their time there. Anyone else? Liz.
How does a halfway house vary from house arrest?
House arrest is usually in your house, and you would wear an electric monitoring device, and you're only allowed 100 feet from your house for a certain amount of time every day, whereas a halfway house is monitored by whoever is in charge of it, and you have to submit drug tests or whatever your probation requires. Anyone else? Okay, thank you.